At the end of Mark chapter 1, Jesus, after healing like the whole city of Capernaum, begins traveling through the surrounding towns. The first person he heals on this journey is a leper who says something outrageous. "If you are willing, you can make me clean." And then a textual difficulty. Some manuscripts say Jesus was filled with compassion. Some say he was indignant. And I think both are true. Like, when I'm emailing my lecturer, like, the day after an assignment is due, like, "Yes, I should have submitted an extension form 4 working days beforehand, but you could just, like, not deduct me the late marks." Like, I think it's the same kind of mix of compassion and indignance that I get, right? Because in this case, the leper is really asking to ignore the correct procedure for being healed from leprosy. The correct procedure, by the way, looks like this. That's like a week's long instructions for how to get cured of leprosy, right? So Jesus is like, "Listen, leper, okay, like, I am willing so you could be clean, but you should also just go and submit the request form anyway, because I want it to look like, I probably did it around the right channels. We don't need that anymore. I'm not going to read it out to you. I could, but I'm not, because I'm compassionate." So, we can see the audacity of the leper here, asking to just, like, be made clean at the will of Jesus, right? But Jesus, like, and so it's like, "Oh, like, you can't, but, we can sneak it by, right?" But the next time, when the guys are literally digging through the roof to let their friend down, and all of the teachers of the law are there, suddenly Jesus is not able to be quite as covert in his outrageous healing for no reason other than he feels like it little escapade. But he's like, "Yeah, you know what, I could see that you mean it, your sins are forgiven." And everyone's like, "What?" And then Jesus does something worse in the next story. He eats with sinners. What? That's just actually against the law. And then in the next story, Jesus does something worse. His disciples don't fast, even when all of the other religious are fasting. And then, in our passage, Jesus comes face to face with the most serious and visible ritual of his religion, the Sabbath. How shall we explain the importance of the Sabbath? The Sabbath was not just a holy day. It was kind of like the central ritual around which the Jewish religious identity was built. It was deeply visible in the context of their Roman occupation, to the point where even the Romans were like, "Don't bother taxing them for Sunday, they don't even do any work then." Except it was Saturday, but it doesn't matter. The instructions for how to observe the Sabbath are found in the Book of the Law, specifically in the 10 Commandments. The Book of the Law is the first 5 books of our Bible. That's the Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, right? And so the instructions to observe the Sabbath day actually appear, first of all, in Exodus. It's the third or the fourth of the 10 Commandments, depending on how you count it. So we're going to take a look. Exodus 20. "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do no work, neither you, nor your son or daughter or child, nor your male or female servant or other servant, nor your animals, the earth, the sea, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." I think this is generally the cultural understanding we have of the Sabbath, yeah? Like, just as God worked 6 days, and then he rested on the 7th day, so we work 6 days, and then we work on the 7th, yeah? The word Shabbath is spelt the same in the old manuscripts as Shavath, which literally means to stop, to cease, to disappear, to take a holiday. Yes, please. So, in our passage, Jesus says to the Pharisees, "You Pharisees, you are so busy with your rituals and your religion, you have made the day of rest into a working day. Stop working so hard. Carve out time to rest." In this, we see that Jesus rejects the capitalist agenda of productivity in favor of radical rest. Well, that's not what happens, is it? One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the cornfields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some ears of corn. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, what they're doing is unlawful on the Sabbath. These guys aren't resting at all. In fact, they're technically harvesting crops. That is a strict violation of the law." So the Pharisees are like, "No, you can't." But also, the disciples aren't quite harvesting crops. Like it's literally like plucking grain. Like they're not out there with a sickle and their donkeys and their mates, like harvesting the land. They're just kind of, getting some delicious corn in their mouths, right? So some people use this passage to point out how legalistic the Pharisees are being, but I actually want to not make that point. I want to make like a slightly different one, okay? So if we imagine, you're a child, like a little farmer kid, your parents own a little wheat farm, and I grew up in cities, so the closest thing I have to this is how we had this grass in our courtyard that looked like tiny grains of wheat, and we used to like pick the little grains and then get dirt and then grind it into flour, and then our mud pies were made with flour, right? So, but I imagine it would be weird if my parents had to be like, listen, love your mud pie game, real unique, but you can't do that on Sundays. Stop. I'd be like, what kind of relationship does that create between me and my courtyard, or someone else and their grain field, or someone in their, like a fisherman child and the boat that they just, play in? Like, if your field once a week becomes a site for sin, even though it's a good field, it kind of tinges it. Like, for those of you who grew up with interacting with purity culture, that's me, I'm talking to myself, when your body becomes a potential site of sin, what kind of relationship does that create between yourself and your body? Is the Sabbath taking some kind of, it's almost like unrestful, because now I have to remember, don't make mud pies in the garden. Don't accidentally catch a fish when I'm dangling my hands in the water. Don't press the button for the elevator. You got to wait for a Gentile to come to press the button. That's a modern Jew joke. So the Pharisees are like, no, you can't do this. But Jesus doesn't say, don't you think that's a little bit legalistic, really? Honestly, this is their own field anyway, and if they're hungry, they should be able to eat their own grain. No, he says something worse. He says, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and only on a certain day, and then they have to burn the rest of it. And then he also gave some to his companions, just some guys. Dude, that's not just breaking Sabbath law, that's breaking actual holiness code law. The audacity to take from holiness what you need to be able to look at sacred bread and say, I am hungry, and then to feed yourself. God doesn't just say, if you are hungry, you can eat your own food. God is saying, if you are hungry, you can eat my food. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. What were humans doing for the first 6 days of creation? Mostly nothing, being dirt, chilling in non-existence, and then on the 6th day they were made flesh and given all the food in the garden to eat. They were not given the Sabbath as an institution at the time. God was observing Sabbath. God was resting. But these newborn children of humanity, they were probably eating God's garden, God's food. When Jesus says in the middle of our passage, the Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath, he was saying, this is the ritualization of how you take what you need as a gift from me to you. The festival of saying, I am hungry, and then eating. Taking what you need, even if that thing is not holy enough, even if that thing is too holy, because it was made for you. And what we need is often rest. I was listening to all of these nice Sabbath songs, and I was like, yes, it would be nice if my sermon was just about how we should rest and stuff, because I really want that to be the point of my sermon too. But it makes sense that ancestral Sabbath rituals emphasized rest, because, we really need that very badly, actually. But we also need food, and walking through grain fields, and friends to walk through grain fields with. It's not literally about rest. It's about the time to receive, to take what we need. But that's also only one half of the story. The Ten Commandments are actually listed twice in the Jewish law, once in Exodus and then once in Deuteronomy. I read you the Sabbath law from the first one earlier, and now I'm going to read you the second one from Deuteronomy 5. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your children, nor your servants, nor your ox, nor your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. These two Sabbath law texts I read you are set at least a generation apart, and in that time we can see the Israelite theology has already changed a little, expanded a little. What's different about this one compared to the last Sabbath we read? I'm going to make you answer that. What's different from this one from the last one? The reasons changed. That's weird, right? Like, I am so used to the 7 days creation story justification for Sabbath, right? I grew up with that. It's weird that the story, Deuteronomy, it's like the Bible, Deuteronomy, the story is already more complex than that. Now it's keep the Sabbath because you were once slaves, and now you are brought out. The Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So let's also look at the second Sabbath story of our passage. Another time Jesus went into the synagogue and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus because it's going to do one. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with a shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "What is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around them in anger and, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. The Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. And I'm not the only human here. I can't just take all the food I need and call it a good religion. There are a lot of humans the Sabbath was made for, and a lot of humans who have not been brought out of slavery, literally and in other ways. Does our religion, particularly the visible part, the core part, the part we repeat, the part that people see, the part that people know not to tax us for doing, does it do good or do evil? Who is in slavery? Whose hand needs to be stretched out? I know you're kind of waiting for me to interpret this bit of the story, but the more that I sat with it, I was like, well, kind of people with illnesses and disabilities aren't metaphors, they just exist. We don't have to be this is a metaphor for the spiritual healing that I, a person with no disabilities, need. Actually, this need just still exists. We don't need to contextualize it. People just need to be healed and need to be brought out of slavery and need to be given a place in the temple and need goodness to be saved, save life. So, when it comes to the reflection time, which is not yet. Yeah, we've got time. It's not yet. I want you to think about your Sabbath. And when I say your Sabbath, I mean whatever you position as kind of the central religious ritual / identity / marker thing blob. You don't have to name it. You can just vibe it. This thing that you call your personhood in relation to God and to one another. Just picture it as a vibe. And then we're going to have a little personal evaluation, right? And you're going to ask these two questions. Can you take what you need from it? Does it heal you? Because sometimes I think self-denial, I think it's aesthetic to have a religion that hurts us, but that is not what is good for us. It's not what was made for us. Does it heal you? And then the second question is, does it heal others? Does it save life? Put that in your brain now. Okay. But before I get you to do that, I'm going to point out one last little fun literary coincidence. In Jewish literature, it's common for the center of a text to be the most important. For example, the center of our text today is Jesus saying, the Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath, which is like a crazy thing to say about your religion, actually. Like, I could have just done the whole sermon on that, but then I couldn't have done it justice, so I just left it. But you can just think about that in your own time. The Jewish law, Torah, is 5 books, right? Exodus had our first Sabbath commandment, and Deuteronomy had our second Sabbath commandment. But the center of the Torah is Leviticus, and the center of Leviticus is the instructions for Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the calendar, the Day of Atonement, the day a human enters the most holy place and everyone is made clean. How is Yom Kippur described? In Leviticus 16, this is to be a lasting ordinance for you. On the 10th day of the 7th month, you must deny yourselves and not do any work, whether native born or a foreigner residing among you, because on this day atonement will be made for you, to cleanse you. Then before the Lord you will be clean from all of your sins. This is a Sabbath Sabbath. And be humbled. This is a forever ordinance. And you weren't made for this. This was made for you.